Chapter 5. Geralt looked out of the palace window for the last time. Dusk was falling rapidly. Beyond the lake, the distant lights of Wisdom twinkled. There was a wilderness around the old palace, a strip of no man's land with which, over 7 years, the town had cut itself off from this dangerous place, leaving nothing but a few ruins, rotten beams, and the remnants of a gap-toothed palisade, which had obviously not been worth dismantling and moving. As far away as possible, at the opposite end of the settlement, the king had built his new residence. The stout tower of his new palace loomed black in the distance against the darkening blue of the sky. In one of the emptied, plundered chambers, the Witcher returned to the dusty table at which he was preparing, calmly and meticulously. He knew he had plenty of time. The Striga would not leave her crypt before midnight. On the table in front of him, he had a small chest with metal fittings. He opened it. Inside, packed tightly in compartments lined with dried grass, stood small vials of dark glass. The Witcher removed 3. From the floor, he picked up an oblong packet thickly wrapped in sheepskins and fastened with a leather strap. He unwrapped it and pulled out a sword with an elaborate hilt in a black, shiny scabbard covered with rows of runic signs and symbols. He drew the blade, which lit up with a pure shine of mirror-like brightness. It was pure silver. Geralt whispered an incantation and drank, one after the other, the contents of 2 vials, placing his left hand on the blade of the sword after each sip. Then, wrapping himself tightly in his black coat, he sat down on the floor. There were no chairs in the chamber, or in the rest of the palace. He sat motionless, his eyes closed. His breathing, at first even, suddenly quickened, became rasping and tense, and then stopped completely. The mixture which helped the Witcher gain full control of his body was chiefly made up of veratrum, stramothium, hawthorn, and spurge. The other ingredients had no name in any human language. For anyone who was not, like Geralt, in tune to it from childhood, it would have been a lethal poison. The Witcher turned his head abruptly. In the silence, his hearing, sharpened beyond measure, easily picked out the rustle of footsteps through the courtyard overgrown with stinging nettles. It could not be the Striga. The steps were too light. Geralt threw his sword across his back, hid his bundle in the hearth of the ruined chimney place, and, silent as a bat, ran downstairs. It was still light enough in the courtyard for the approaching man to see the Witcher's face. The man, Ostrit, backed away abruptly. An involuntary grimace of terror and repulsion contorted his lips. The Witcher smiled wryly. He knew what he looked like. After drinking a mixture of banewort, monk's hood, and eyebright, the face takes on the color of chalk, and the pupils fill the entire iris. But the mixture enables one to see in the deepest darkness, and this is what Geralt wanted. Ostrit quickly regained control. "You look as if you were already a corpse, Witcher," he said. "From fear, no doubt. Don't be afraid, I bring you reprieve." The Witcher did not reply. "Don't you hear what I say, you Rivian charlatan? You're saved, and rich." Ostrit hefted a sizable purse in his hand and threw it at Geralt's feet. 1,000 orens. Take it. Get on your horse and get out of here. The Rivian still said nothing. "Don't gawp at me," Ostrit raised his voice. "And don't waste my time. I have no intention of standing here until midnight. Don't you understand? I do not wish you to undo the spell. No, you haven't guessed. I am not in league with Velerad and Segolin. I don't want you to kill her. You are simply to leave. Everything is to stay as it is." The Witcher did not move. He did not want the magnet to realize how fast his movements and reactions now were. It was quickly growing dark. A relief, as even the semi-darkness of dusk was too bright for his dilated pupils. "And why, sir, is everything to remain as it is?" he asked, trying to enunciate each word slowly. "Now that," Ostrit raised his head proudly, "should really be of damn little concern to you." "And what if I already know?" "Go on." It will be easier to remove Foltest from the throne if the Striga frightens the people even more. If the royal madness completely disgusts both magnates and common folk. Am I right? I came here by the way of Redania and Novigrad. There is much talk there that there are those in Wisdom who look to King Vizimir as their savior and true monarch. But I, Lord Ostrit, do not care about politics or the successions to thrones or revolutions in palaces. I am here to accomplish my task. Have you never heard of the sense of responsibility and plain honesty, about professional ethics? Careful to whom you speak, you vagabond, Ostrit yelled furiously, placing his hand on the hilt of his sword. I've had enough of this. I'm not accustomed to hold such discussions. Look at you. Ethics, codes of practice, morality. Who are you to talk? A brigand who's barely arrived before he starts murdering men, who bends double to Foltest and behind his back bargains with Velerad like a hired thug? And you dare to turn your nose up at me? You serf. Play at being a knowing one, a magician, you scheming witcher. Be gone before I run the flat of my sword across your gob. The witcher did not stir. He stood calmly. You'd better leave, Lord Ostrit, he said. It's growing dark. Ostrit took a step back and drew his sword in a flash. You asked for this, you sorcerer. I'll kill you. Your tricks won't help you. I carry a turtle stone. Geralt smiled. The reputation of Turtlestone was as mistaken as it was popular, but the Witcher was not going to lose his strength on spells, much less expose his silver sword to contact with Ostrit's blade. He dived under the whirling blade and, with the heel of his hand and his silver-studded cuff, hit him in the temple. Chapter 6. Ostrit quickly regained consciousness and looked around in total darkness. He noticed that he was tied up. He did not see Geralt standing right beside him, but he realized where he was and let a prolonged, terrifying howl. Keep quiet, said the Witcher. Otherwise you'll lure her out before her time. You damned murderer, where are you? Untie me immediately, you louse. You'll hang for this, you son of a bitch. Quiet. Ostrit panted heavily. You're leaving me here to be devoured by her, tied up? He asked, quieter now, whispering a vile invective. No, said the Witcher. I'll let you go, but not now. You scoundrel, hissed Ostrit. To distract the Striga? Yes. Ostrit didn't say anything. He stopped wriggling and lay quietly. Witcher? Yes. It's true that I wanted to overthrow Foltest. I'm not the only one, but I am the only one who wanted him dead. I wanted him to die in agony, to go mad, to rot alive. Do you know why? Geralt remained silent. I loved Ada, the king's sister, the king's mistress, the king's trollop. I loved her, Witcher. Are you there? I am. I know what you're thinking, but it wasn't like that. Believe me, I didn't cast any spells. I don't know anything about magic. Only once in anger did I say, only once, Witcher, are you listening? I am. It's his mother, the old queen. It must be her. She couldn't watch him and Ada. It wasn't me. I only once, tried to persuade them, but Ada. Witcher! I was besotted and said, Witcher, was it me? Me? It doesn't matter anymore. Witcher, is it nearly midnight? It's close. Let me go. Give me some more time. No. Ostrit did not hear the scrape of the tomb lid being moved aside, but the Witcher did. He leaned over and with his dagger cut the magnet's bonds. Ostrit did not wait for the word. He jumped up, numb, hobbled clumsily, and ran. His eyes had grown accustomed enough to the darkness for him to see his way from the main hall to the exit. The slab blocking the entrance to the crypt opened and fell to the floor with a thud. Geralt, prudently behind the staircase balustrade, saw the misshapen figure of the Striga speeding swiftly and unerringly in the direction of Ostrit's receding footsteps. Not the slightest sound issued from the Striga. A terrible, quivering, frenzied scream tore the night, shook the old walls, continued rising and falling, vibrating. The Witcher couldn't make out exactly how far away it was. His sharpened hearing deceived him, but he knew that the Striga had caught up with Ostrit quickly. Too quickly. He stepped into the middle of the hall, stood right at the entrance of the crypt. He threw down his coat, twitched his shoulders, adjusted the position of his sword, and pulled on his gauntlets. He still had some time. He knew that the Striga, although well fed after the last full moon, would not readily abandon Ostrit's corpse. The heart and liver were, for her, valuable reserves of nutrition for the long periods spent in lethargic sleep. The Witcher waited. By his count, there were about 3 hours left until dawn. The cock's crow could only mislead him. Besides, there were probably no cocks in the neighborhood. He heard her. She was trudging slowly, shuffling along the floor, and then he saw her. The description had been accurate. The disproportionately large head set on a short neck was surrounded by a tangled, curly halo of reddish hair. Her eyes shone in the darkness like an animal's. The Striga stood motionless, her gaze fixed on Geralt. Suddenly, she opened her jaws, as if proud of the rows of pointed white teeth, and snapped them shut with a crack like a chest being closed, and leapt, slashing at the Witcher with her bloodied claws. Geralt jumped to the side, spun a swift pirouette. The Striga rubbed against him, also spun around, slicing through the air with her talons. She didn't lose her balance and attacked anew, mid-spin, gnashing her teeth fractions of an inch from Geralt's chest. The Rivian jumped away, changing the direction of his spin with a fluttering pirouette to confuse the Striga. As he leapt away, he dealt a hard blow to the side of her head, with the silver spikes studding the knuckles of his gauntlet. The Striga roared horribly, filling the palace with a booming echo, fell to the ground, froze and startled, and started to howl hollowly and furiously. The Witcher smiled maliciously. His first attempt, as he had hoped, had gone well. Silver was fatal to the Striga, as it was for most monsters brought into existence through magic. So there was a chance. The beast was like the others, and that boded well for lifting the spell, while the silver sword would, as a last resort, assure his life. The Striga was in no hurry with her next attack. She approached slowly, baring her fangs, dribbling repulsively. Geralt backed away and, carefully placing his feet, traced a semicircle. By slowing and quickening his movements, he distracted the Striga, making it difficult for her to leap. As he walked, the Witcher unwound a long, strong silver chain weighted at the end. The moment the Striga tensed and leapt, the chain whistled through the air and, coiling like a snake, twined itself around the monster's shoulders, neck, and head. The Striga's jump became a tumble, and she let out an ear-piercing whistle. She thrashed around on the floor, howling horribly with a fury, or from the burning pain afflicted by the despised metal. Geralt was content. If he wanted to, he could kill the Striga without great difficulty, but the Witcher did not draw his sword. Nothing in the Striga's behavior had given him reason to think she might be an incurable case. Geralt moved to a safer distance and, without letting the writhing shape on the floor out of his sight, breathed deeply and focused himself. The chain snapped. The silver links scattered like rain in all directions, ringing against the stone. The Striga, blind with fury, tumbled to the attack, roaring. Geralt waited calmly, and with his raised right hand, traced the sign of Ard in front of him. The Striga fell back as if hit by a mallet, but kept her feet, extended her talons, and bared her fangs. Her hair stood on end and fluttered as she was walking against a fierce wind. With difficulty, one rasping step at a time, she slowly advanced. But she did advance. Geralt grew uneasy. He did not expect such a simple sign to paralyze the Striga entirely, but neither did he expect the beast to overcome it so easily. He could not hold the sign for long. It was too exhausting, and the Striga had no more than 10 steps to go. He lowered the sign suddenly and sprung aside. The Striga, taken by surprise, flew forward, lost her balance, fell, slid along the floor, and tumbled down the stairs into the crypt's entrance, yawning in the floor. Her infernal scream reverberated from below. To gain time, Geralt jumped onto the stairs leading to the gallery. He had not even climbed halfway up when the Striga ran out of the crypt, speeding along like an enormous black spider. The Witcher waited until she had run up the stairs after him, then leapt over the balustrade. The Striga turned on the stairs, sprang, and flew at him in an amazing 10-meter leap. She did not let herself be deceived by his pirouettes this time. Twice her talons left their mark on the Rivian's leather tunic. But another desperately hard blow from the silver-spiked gauntlet threw the Striga aside, shook her. Geralt, feeling fury building inside of him, swayed, bent backward, and with a mighty kick, knocked the beast off her legs. The roar she gave was louder than all of the previous ones. Even the plaster crumbled from the ceilings. The Striga sprang up, shaking with uncontrolled anger and lust for murder. Geralt waited. He drew his sword, traced circles with it in the air, and skirted the Striga, taking care that the movement of his sword was not in rhythm with his steps. The Striga did not jump. She approached slowly, following the bright streak of the blade with her eyes. Geralt stopped abruptly, froze with his sword raised. The Striga, disconcerted, also stopped. The Witcher traced a slow semicircle with his blade, took a step in the Striga's direction, then another. Then he leapt, feigning a whirling movement with his sword above her head. The Striga curled up, retreated in a zigzag. Geralt was close again, the blade shimmering in his hand. His eyes lit up with an ominous glow. A hoarse roar tore through his clenched teeth. The Striga backed away, pushed by the power of concentrated hatred, anger, and violence which emanated from the attacking man, and struck her in waves, penetrating her mind and body. Terrified and pained by feelings unknown to her, she let out a thin, shaking squeak, turned on the spot, and ran off in a desperate, crazy escape down the dark tangle of the palace's corridors. Geralt stood quivering in the middle of the hall, alone. It had taken a long time, he thought, before this dance on the edge of an abyss, this mad, macabre ballet of a fight, had achieved the desired effect, allowing him to psychically become one with his opponent, to reach the underlayers of concentrated will which permeated the Striga. The evil, twisted will from which the Striga was born. The Witcher shivered at the memory of taking on the evil to redirect it, as if in a mirror, against the monster. Never before had he come across such a concentration of hatred and murderous frenzy, not even from basilisks who enjoyed a ferocious reputation for it. All the better, he thought, as he walked toward the crypt entrance and the blackness that spread from it like an enormous puddle. All the better, all the stronger was the blow received by the Striga. This would give him a little more time until the beast recovered from the shock. The Witcher doubted whether he could repeat such an effort. The elixirs were weakening, and it was still a long time till dawn. But the Striga could not return to her crypt before first light, or all his trouble would have come to nothing. He went down the stairs. The crypt was not large. There were room for 3 more stone sarcophagi. The slab covering the first was half pushed aside. Geralt pulled the 3rd vial from beneath his tunic, quickly drank its contents, climbed into the tomb, and stretched out in it. As he had expected, it was a double tomb, for mother and daughter. He had only just pulled the cover closed when he heard the Striga's roar again. He lay on his back, next to Ada's mummified corpse, and traced the sign of Irden on the inside of the slab. He laid his sword on his chest, stood a tiny hourglass filled with phosphorescent sand next to it, and crossed his arms. He no longer heard the Striga's screams as she searched the palace. He had gradually stopped hearing anything as the true love and Celadine began to work. Chapter 7. When Geralt opened his eyes, the sand had passed through the hourglass, which meant his sleep had been for even longer than he had intended. He pricked up his ears and heard nothing. His senses were now functioning normally. He took hold of his sword and, murmuring an incantation, ran his hand across the lid of the sarcophagus. He then moved the slab slightly, only a couple of inches. Silence. He pushed the lid further, sat, holding his weapon at the ready, and lifted his head above the tomb. The crypt was dark, but the Witcher knew that outside dawn was breaking. He struck a light, lit a miniature lamp, and lifted it, throwing strange shadows across the walls of the crypt. It was empty. He scrambled from the sarcophagus, aching, numb, cold. And then he saw her. She was lying on her back next to the tomb, naked and unconscious. She was rather ugly, slim, with small pointed breasts and dirty. Her hair, flaxen red, reached almost to her waist. Standing the lamp on the slab, he knelt beside her and leaned over. Her lips were pale, and her face was bloody. Geralt removed his gloves, put his sword aside, and without any fuss drew up her top lip with his finger. Her teeth were normal. He reached for her hand, which was buried in her tangled hair. Before he took it, he saw her open her eyes. Too late. She swiped him across the neck with her talons, cutting him deeply. Blood splashed onto her face. She howled, striking him in the eyes with her other hand. He fell on her, grabbing her by the wrists, nailing her to the floor. She gnashed her teeth, which were now too short, in front of his face. He butted her in the face with his forehead and pinned her down harder. She had lost her former strength. She could only writhe beneath him, howling, spitting out blood, his blood, which was pouring over her mouth. His blood was draining away quickly. There was no time. The Witcher cursed and bit her hard on the neck, just below the ear. He dug his teeth in and clenched them until her inhuman howling became a thin, despairing scream and then a choking sob. The cry of a hurt 14-year-old girl. He let her go when she stopped moving, got to his knees, tore a piece of canvas from his sleeve pocket, and pressed it to his neck. He felt for his sword, held the blade to the unconscious girl's throat, and leaned over her hand. The nails were dirty, broken, bloodied, but normal. Completely normal. The Witcher got up with difficulty. The sticky, wet grayness of early morning was flooding in through the crypt's entrance. He made a move towards the stairs but staggered and sat down heavily on the floor. Blood was pouring through the drenched canvas onto his hands, running down his sleeve. He unfastened his tunic, slit his shirt, tore and ripped rags from it, and then tied them around his neck, knowing that he did not have much time and that he would soon faint. He succeeded, and fainted. In Wisdom, beyond the lake, a cock, ruffling his feathers in the cold damp, crowed hoarsely for the third time. Chapter 8. He saw the whitened walls and beamed ceiling of the small chamber above the guard room. He moved his head, grimacing with pain and moan. His neck was bandaged, thickly, thoroughly, professionally. "Lie still, Witcher," said Velerad. "Lie, do not move. My sword." Yes, of course. What is most important is your Witcher's silver sword. It's here, don't worry. Both the sword and your little trunk. And the 3,000 orens. Yes, don't utter a word. It is I who am an old fool, and you the wise witcher. Foltest has been repeating it over and over for the last 2 days. 2? Oh yes, 2. She slit your neck open quite thoroughly. One could see everything you have inside there. You lost a great deal of blood. Fortunately, we hurried to the palace straight after the third crowing of the cock. Nobody slept in Wisdom that night. It was impossible. You made a terrible noise. Does my talking tire you? The princess? The princess is like a princess. Thin and somewhat dull-witted. She weeps incessantly and wets her bed. But Foltest says this will change. I don't think it'll change for the worse. Do you, Witcher? The Witcher closed his eyes. Good. I take my leave now. Rest. Brother Ed got up. Geralt, before I go, tell me, why did you try to bite her to death? Eh, Geralt? The Witcher was asleep. The Voice of Reason, Part 2, Chapter 1. Geralt. He raised his head, torn from sleep. The sun was already high and forced blinding golden rays through the shutters, penetrating the chamber with tentacles of light. The Witcher shaded his eyes with his hands in an unnecessary, instinctive reflex which he had never managed to shake off. All he needed to do, after all, was narrow his pupils into vertical slits. It's late, said Nenneke, opening the shutters. You've slept in. Off with you, Iola. The girl sat up suddenly and leaned out of bed to take her mantle from the floor. Geralt felt a trickle of cool saliva on his shoulder where her lips had been a moment ago. Wait, he said hesitantly. She looked at him and quickly turned away. She had changed. There was nothing of the water nymph in her anymore, nothing of the luminous, chamomile-scented apparition she had been at dawn. Her eyes were blue, not black. She had freckles on her nose, her neckline, her shoulders. They weren't unattractive. They suited her complexion and reddish hair. But he hadn't seen them at dawn, when she had been in his dream. With shame, he realized he felt resentment toward her. Resentment that she hadn't remained a dream, and that he would never forgive himself for it. Wait, he repeated. Iola, I wanted... Don't speak to her, Geralt, said Nenneke. She won't answer you anyway. Off with you, Iola. Wrapped in her mantle, the girl pattered toward the door, her bare feet slapping the floor. Troubled, flushed, and awkward. No longer reminding him in any way of Yennefer. Nenneke, he said, reaching for his shirt. I hope you're not annoyed that... You won't punish her, will you? Fool, the priestess snorted. You've forgotten where you are. This is neither a hermitage nor a covenant. It's Melatele's temple. Our goddess doesn't forbid our priestesses anything. Almost. You forbade me to talk to her. I didn't forbid you, but I know it's pointless. Iola doesn't speak. What? She doesn't speak. She's taken a vow. It's a sort of sacrifice through which... Oh, what's the point of explaining? You wouldn't understand anyway. You wouldn't even try to understand. I know your views on religion. No, don't get dressed yet. I want to check your neck. She sat on the edge of the bed and skillfully unwound the linen bandages wrapped thickly around the Witcher's neck. He grimaced in pain. As soon as he had arrived in Alander, Nenneke had removed the painfully thick stitches of shoemaker's twine with which they had stitched him in Wisdom, opened the wound, and dressed it again. The results were clear. He had arrived at the temple almost cured, if perhaps a little stiff. Now he was sick again, and in pain. But he didn't protest. He'd known the priestess for years and knew how great was her knowledge of healing, how rich and comprehensive her pharmacy was. A course of treatment at Melatele's temple could do nothing but good. Neneke felt the wound, washed it, and began to curse. He already knew this routine by heart. She had started on the very first day, and had never failed to moan when she saw the marks left by the Princess of Wisdom's talon. It's terrible to let yourself be slashed like this by an ordinary striga. Muscles, tendons, she only just missed your carotid artery. Great Melatele. Geralt, what's happening to you? How did she get so close to you? What did you want with her? To mount her? He didn't answer and smiled faintly. Don't grin like an idiot. The priestess rose and took a bag of dressings from the chest of drawers. Despite her weight and low stature, she moved swiftly and gratefully. There's nothing funny about it. You're losing your reflexes, Geralt. You're exaggerating. I'm not exaggerating at all. Neneke spread a greenish mush smelling sharply of eucalyptus over the wound. You shouldn't have allowed yourself to get wounded, but you did, and very seriously at that. Fatally even. And even with your exceptional powers of regeneration, it'll be months before your neck is fully mobile again. I warn you, don't test your strength by fighting an agile opponent during that time. Thank you for the warning. Perhaps you could give me some advice, too. How am I supposed to live in the meantime? Rally a few girls, buy a cart, and organize a traveling house of ill repute? Neneke shrugged, bandaging his neck with quick, deft movements. Am I supposed to give you advice and teach you how to live? Am I your mother or something? Right, that's done. You can get dressed. Breakfast's waiting for you in the refectory. Hurry up, you'll have to make it yourself. I don't intend to keep the girls in the kitchen till midday. Where will I find you later? In the sanctuary? No. Neneke got up. Not in the sanctuary. You're a welcome guest here, Witcher. Don't hang around in the sanctuary. Go for a walk and I'll find you myself. Fine. Chapter 2. Geralt strolled for the fourth time along the poplar alley which led from the gate to the dwellings by the sanctuary and the main temple block, which merged into the sheer rock. After brief consideration, he decided against returning to the shelter and turned down towards the gardens and outbuildings. Umpteen priestesses, clad in gray working garments, were toiling away, weeding the beds and feeding the birds in the henhouse. The majority of them were young, or very young, virtually children. Some greeted him with a nod or a smile in passing. He answered their greetings but didn't recognize any of them. Although he often visited the temple, once or even twice a year, he never saw more than 3 or 4 faces he knew. The girls came and went, becoming oracles in other temples, midwives and healers, specializing in women's and children's diseases, wandering druids, teachers, or governesses. But there was never a shortage of priestesses, arriving from all over, even the most remotest regions. Melatele's temple in Elander was well known and enjoyed well-earned fame. The cult of Melatele was one of the oldest and, in its day, one of the most widespread cults from the time immemorial. Practically every pre-human race and every primordial nomadic human tribe honored a goddess of harvest and fertility, a guardian of farmers and gardeners, a patroness of love and marriage. Many of these religions merged into the cult of Melatele. Time, which was quite pitiless towards other religions and cults, effectively isolating them in forgotten, rarely visited little temples and oratories buried among urban buildings, had proved merciful to Melatele. She did not lack either followers or sponsors. In explaining the popularity of the goddess, learned men who studied this phenomenon used to hark back to the pre-cults of the Great Mother, Mother Nature, and pointed to the links with nature's cycle, with the rebirth of life, and other grandiloquently named phenomena. Geralt's friend, the troubadour Dandelion, who enjoyed a reputation as a specialist in every field, looked for simpler explanations. Melitelli's cult, he deduced, was a typical woman's cult. Melitelli was, after all, the patroness of fertility and birth. She was the guardian of midwives, and a woman in labor has to scream. Apart from the usual cries, usually promising never to give herself to any bloody man ever again in life, a woman in labor has to call upon some godhead for help, and Melitelli was perfect. And since women give birth, and will continue to give birth, the goddess Melitelli, the poet proved, did not have to fear for her popularity. Geralt. Neneke, I was looking for you. Me? The priestess looked at him mockingly. Not Iola? Iola too. Does that bother you? Right now, yes. I don't want you to get in her way and distract her. She's got to get herself ready and pray if something's to come of this trance. I've already told you, he said coldly. I don't want any trance. I don't think a trance will help me in any way. Neneke winced. Don't think a trance will harm you in any way. I can't be hypnotized. I have immunity. I'm afraid for Iola. It might be too great an effort for a medium. Iola isn't a medium or a mentally ill soothsayer. That child enjoys the goddess's favor. Don't pull silly faces, if you please. As I said, your view on religion is known to me. It's never particularly bothered me, and no doubt it won't bother me in the future. I'm not a fanatic. You've a right to believe that we're governed by nature and the force hidden within her. You can think that the gods, including my Melitelli, are merely a personification of this power, invented for simpletons so that they can understand it better, accept its existence. According to you, that power is blind. But for me, Geralt, faith allows you to expect what my goddess personifications from nature: order, law, goodness, and hope. I know. If you know that, then why your reservations about the trance? What are you afraid of? That I'll make you bow your head to a statue and sing canticles? Geralt, we'll simply sit together for a while, you, me, and Iola, and see if the girl's talents will let her see into the vortex of power surrounding you. Maybe we'll discover something worth knowing, and maybe we won't discover anything. Maybe the power and fate surrounding you won't choose to reveal themselves to us, will remain hidden and incomprehensible. I don't know, but why shouldn't we try? Because there's no point. I'm not surrounded by any vortex of fate, and if I were, why the hell would I delve into it? Geralt, you're sick. Injured, you mean. I know what I mean. There's something not quite right with you. I can sense that. After all, I have known you ever since you were a youngster. When I met you, you came up to my waist. And now I feel that you're spinning around in some damned whirlpool, tangled up in a slowly tightening noose. I want to know what's happening, but I can't do it myself. I have to count on Iola's gifts. You want to delve too deeply. Why the metaphysics? I'll confide in you if you like. I'll fill your evenings with tales of ever more astounding events from the past few years. Get a keg of beer so my throat doesn't dry up, and we can start today. But I fear I'll bore you because you won't find any nooses or vortices. Just a witcher's ordinary tales. I'll willingly listen to them, but a trance, I repeat, would do no harm. Don't you think, he smiled, that my lack of faith makes such a trance pointless? No, I don't. And do you know why? No. Neneke leaned over and looked him in the eyes with a strange smile on her pale lips. Because it would be the first proof I've ever heard of that a lack of faith has any kind of power at all.